Mike Gallagher watched from his second-floor bedroom window as his wife at the entrance to their home passionately embraced Jake Williams, the man who always said he was his best friend. He'd brought her home from downtown where they'd spent several hours together. This meeting was their fifth date, and while Mike watched and listened to what they talked about, he learned of their plan to humiliate him even more. His so-called friend had explicitly told Christy that he wanted to spend a whole week with her, but she shook her head regretfully in the negative after a little thought. "Not a whole week, Jake, not yet," she said. "Maybe a weekend, but only on one condition." "What condition?" he asked. "You have to make Mike pay for our date." She blurted out, excited by her idea. He laughed. "That sounds stupid," he said. "You know, I'm much richer than he is. I can easily pay any expenses." No. She interrupted. "You don't understand the most important part of the idea." "What's the important part?" Jake arched an eyebrow, looking at her questioningly. "Mike's humiliation," she said. "Come on, sweetheart, admit that you like humiliating him, don't you? Making fun of him, making him feel like a piece of shit every time?" "Well," Jake stretched out, "you know, he's actually my best friend, and I'm bullshit," his mistress said, rolling her eyes. "What I do know is that you enjoy screwing with him and humiliating him almost as much as I do, and it gets me so turned on every time." She was so horny. She was almost bouncing in her seat. "Look, Christy, let's get this long farce over with," he pleaded. "Come with me and just leave this sucker to his fate. I wanna marry you and spend the rest of my life with you." She laughed. "I'll tell you what, stud," she finally said, "let me get him to foot the full bill for our hot weekend of wild sex, and I'll think about your proposal, okay?" Jake gave a slightly annoyed sigh, but then smirked. "Oh, I'm sure this weekend will definitely be very kinky," he whispered in her ear, hugging her and getting ready to head back to his car. "I'll talk to you soon, but don't keep me waiting too long. My balls are already almost blue from wanting to discharge." She watched Jake leave, even waved as he drove away, and then turned toward the house she shared with her husband, Mike. Upon entering, she immediately began undressing as she made her way up the stairs. When Christy entered the bedroom, she met her eyes with Mike sitting on the bed. Tossing her blouse to the floor, grinning and looking directly at him, she unbuttoned her skirt, letting it fall to her feet. Now she found herself completely naked, as this married woman always went on dates with Jake without wearing a bra or panties. Christy walked to the bathroom and began to examine herself in the mirror, leaving the door open. "You probably heard what we were talking about," she asked nonchalantly, watching his reaction through the mirror out of the corner of her eye. "I'm leaving you for Jake. We're going to have a dirty weekend together, and you're going to pay all our expenses. Soon, I'll be leaving you for good to marry him. I've been paying for everything since I married you 3 years ago." Mike said, sadly, "I thought we were doing well. I've done nothing but love you with all my heart and try to show it every day. Don't you love me at all?" Christy only snorted contemptuously. "How could I ever continue to love you?" she asked sarcastically. "To me, you're nothing but a slob and a wimp who lets his best friend date his own wife." Taking her eyes off the mirror for a second, she saw Mike turning away from the window and slumping his shoulders, sniffling on the bed. "Oh, come on. Be a man." With a dismissive snort, she tossed it in his direction. "Is that why you've been so disrespectful to me these past few months? What about your vows before the altar?" he asked quietly. "Do you really think I'm going to be stopped by words I once foolishly spoke?" Her voice was full of irony. "The loser and weakling I see in this room doesn't deserve me. Please, Christy, please don't do this to me. I still love you and your cruel words are breaking my heart." Mike's voice trembled as he slid his gaze over her gorgeous figure. Even years later, he continued to look at her with loving eyes, just as he had on that wedding day when, insanely happy, he held her hands and put the ring on her finger. Christy noticed that he was looking at her naked body with lust in his eyes. With a snort, she shook her head. "Don't even think about it, slug," she said. "I'll never let you touch me again. When I want to, I'll call a real man to come and take me properly. How about you? Well, hubby, she smoked wryly. I'll let you sit in the chair in the corner and watch me have my fun in front of you. Engrossed in her fantasies, Christy didn't notice how with each passing minute the features of his always soft face hardened. The skin on his cheekbones tightened. And the fingers on his hands involuntarily clenched into fist. Damn. You bitch, Mike muttered, getting out of bed. Christy's hand brushing his curls froze halfway down his arm. It was the first time her soft and loving husband had spoken such harsh words to her. Straightening up and turning her head, she followed with her eyes as he left the room and started down the stairs. Intrigued and partly a little alarmed, Christy tossed the hairbrush into the sink, hurried downstairs after Mike, and saw him reach his hand toward the front door. Where do you think you're going? Are you going to go to the pub, get drunk, and complain to the bartender about your worthless life, or are you going to run to your mommy and cry on her shoulder like a baby? She snorted sarcastically, standing on the stairs with her arms at her sides. He stopped for a moment at the door and stared at her sadness in his eyes for several long seconds. Upstairs, in their former family bedroom, he realized that he had taken all he could from her, and decided that he no longer owed this woman anything. Goodbye, Christy. He finally said before slamming the door. She heard his car door open and then slammed shut. The engine roared. And a few seconds later, she saw him pull away. Where is he going? Christy wondered in puzzlement, but then only shrugged. Fuck it. She thought nonchalantly. Good riddance to horny trash. She grabbed her phone and dialed a familiar number. Hello, my favorite? She murmured. My slug crawled out of the house somewhere, so why don't you come over? You're on your way. Hurry up, I can't wait. 3 days later, Michael pulled up to the house. Opening the garage door with a signal from inside his car, he drove inside and closed the large door. Grabbing his briefcase, he strode purposefully into the house. Christy was sitting at the kitchen table at this hour of the morning, reading the newspaper and drinking coffee. Michael didn't say a word to her. Simply walking past his wife's raised head and into his home office. Consumed with curiosity, Christy hastily got up from her desk, walked to the door of his study and tried to enter. She turned the knob, but the door was locked. That's odd, she thought. Her husband never locked that door. She knocked on the heavy wood paneling, and when the lock clicked after a few seconds, she turned the knob. When she opened the door, she saw him sitting at his desk. He was scrutinizing a map of some area on his computer. Christy knew that Mike was in the process of designing a housing development around one of the many lakes in the area, and decided that the map was exactly what he was working on. What do you want? He asked curtly, raising his heavy gaze to her. For a moment, she recoiled and felt less than confident. He'd never been harsh with her before, but on the other hand, she realized that she had been acting rather disrespectful to him lately. I was worried. She answered, managing to clear the sudden hoarseness from her throat. You left 3 days ago, and I haven't heard from you. I tried calling your cell phone, but you never answered. Are you sure you were actually worried about me? He asked the question with obvious sarcasm. Christy paused for a moment. Was this really her Mike? He looked like Mike. Sounded like Mike, but there was something about him that was a little different, like he changed inside. Perhaps she had gone too far in regards to him. She tried to reach out to stroke his cheek, but he managed to dodge her touch. Don't you want to kiss your wife? She asked resentfully. It's been 3 whole days since I last saw you. He stared at her for a few moments as if she were some disgusting to be examined under a microscope, then he shook his head negatively. No, he said, turning back to his computer. Please close the door when you leave. Christy was now truly confused. Her husband had never refused her signs of attention and always kissed her at any suitable opportunity. This same man sitting nonchalantly in front of her was so cold. She shivered. Carefully closed the door to his off and immediately headed to the master bedroom to get her phone. She dialed a familiar number and a man answered after the first beep. Jake, he's back. Christy said, but I don't know. Something's wrong. It's like he's become a completely different person. He didn't even kiss me when he came in the house. Don't worry so much about it, sweetheart, Jake hummed soothingly into the phone. He's probably just realized that you're leaving him, and there's nothing he can do to stop you. I'll come over tonight, and the two of us will take care of everything. Just let me talk to him for a few minutes, and I'll take care of it. Okay, Christy said not too confidently. I hope you're right and everything will be okay. See you tonight, my sweetie, kisses, and love you. Michael heard half of her conversation and smiled as he went back to his computer. That same evening, Jake pulled into the driveway of Mike's house. Christy opened the door and let him in, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him fervently as he entered. Where is he? Jake asked when she pulled away from him. Christy pointed to the office door. He's been in there all day, she said. Let me have a word with him alone. The lover said as he headed for the study door. It won't take long. He knocked on the door, finding it locked. Mike, it's me, Jake, your friend. Can we talk for a few minutes? The door lock clicked and Jake stepped inside. He gave a friendly smile and was about to move forward extending his hand, but stopped after a couple steps. The owner of the house was sitting at the table leaning back in his chair, staring intently at Jake, not even making an attempt to move. The smile slipped from his lips and his hand, which had been hanging ridiculously low in the air, slid down slowly. Close the door behind you and sit down, Michael commanded, pointing to an empty chair. Jake closed the heavy door and sat down. And Michael took his time pouring himself a drink. Aren't you going to offer your friend a drink? Jake asked, as he screwed the cap back on the bottle of scotch and set it back on the counter. Michael stared straight at him for a moment as if he were looking at nothing. Friend? Are you really my friend? Michael asked. Jake looked confused, looking away. Damn it. Christy was right, he wasn't the weak docile beta male he was used to dealing with. Sure, Jake said, I've been your best friend for years. Remember? Michael grinned. Best friend, he stretched out, as if tasting and rolling that simple phrase around on his tongue. Tell me, my dear, best friend, what kind of friend is it who steals his longtime friend's wife? Hey? Mike, I'm sorry that Jake started before Jake interrupted him. You can't wait to get your hands on Christy, can you? He asked. Jake nodded his head. And how badly do you want her? In other words, how much do you think she's worth? What are you talking about? I don't know what you mean, Mike. Jake said, puzzled. Don't play dumb, Jake, Michael said with a chuckle. You're a very experienced businessman with strong business acumen, or you wouldn't have made all those millions. You know, there's always a price to pay for every deal. So let me ask you again, how valuable is Christy to you? I don't know. Jake mumbled, confused. I think you have something to offer me, don't you? You guessed it, buddy, Michael confirmed with a wry grin. I really like your new Bentley. How much did you pay for that thing? I paid over $500,000 for it, and it's a special order, Jake said with an ill-concealed touch of bravado. I take it that the entire sum for the car has already been paid for. Right? Michael asked. Of course, it's all mine. Jake said, well, that would be a good way to start our deal. Michael smiled and twirled the glass and his fingers looking at the shimmering liquid in the light. Cheers, he saluted Jake, raising the glass and taking a sip. Wait. What? Jake said as if he couldn't believe his ears. You want me to give up my Bentley in exchange for Christy? Michael smiled thinly. Along with 25% of your equity, he added casually. Jake's eyes suddenly squared. That's over $50 million. Jake exclaimed, gasping. You've got to be kidding, or have you just lost your mind? According to my research, that comes to exactly $52,450,389.25. More, Michael said, glancing at his computer, and you're wrong. I'm serious. I'm dead serious. Jake jumped up from his chair and paced nervously from corner to corner, muttering something to himself and occasionally glancing at Michael with distasteful glances. Michael sat at his desk absent-mindedly poring over papers and didn't seem to pay much attention to his friend's floundering. Finally, the man stopped his frantic movement around the office and slumped back in his chair looking at Michael tensely. So you want my car and 25% of my equity in exchange for Christie? Jake asked. Christie had been right. This wasn't the kind of man he was used to manipulating so easily. Why do I even have to think about this? I already have your wife. Grinning, Michael opened one of the documents on his computer and printed it out. Pulling a sheet from the printer that beeped briefly, he held it out to Jake. Yes. But what do you think will happen when your board of directors and your shareholders one day get this? Do you think you'll still be as rich and powerful when this scandalous document hits the media? I doubt it. Michael said, pouring himself another scotch. It's blackmail. Jake grimaced as he read the letter, which detailed all the facts and details of their affair, as well as how he and Christie had long been for best weapon in mentally abusing and degrading Mike. Perhaps think what you want, but my offer is only valid until tomorrow noon. Michael said, after 12 o'clock noon, it goes up to 50% plus a controlling interest in your company. You want Christie? That's my price. This is a highway robbery, Jake exclaimed angrily, throwing up his hands at. You'll never get away with this. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. Michael said thoughtfully, sipping his drink. I know you want her, though God knows why you want her, he shrugged, but that's my price. And I'll tell you something else. If you accept my offer without conditions, I'll make sure you two spend the rest of your lives together. I'll disappear and never bother you again. Isn't that what you want? Well, yes, I would love to spend the rest of my life with Christie, Jake said. Michael smiled. You see, if you agree to that, I'll even promise to make you a celebratory dinner. Michael offered. What do you say to that? I need some time to think about it. Jake answered. Michael nodded, understandably. I'll give you until noon tomorrow. And don't forget, he added, flexing his hand and tapping the face of his wristwatch with his fingernail. The clock is ticking. The former friend took a handkerchief out of his breast pocket and wiped his sweating face and neck with it. Now please close the door behind you when you leave. Michael added, indicating that the meeting was over. I won't keep you any longer. Jake stood up in confusion and walked out of the office on stiff legs. The master of the study watched through the curtains as Jake and Christie left the house. He smiled and made a few phone calls. Christie didn't get home until early morning in her lover's car. Michael heard them talking in the driveway. Just think about it, Jake said. In just a couple days, we can start our new life free of Mike. Now let me go inside and taste those breakfast rolls, he added, grabbing Christie's firm ass. She giggled and pulled his hand away. Not right now, but soon enough, she promised. I can't wait until Mike is serving us as a waiter. Christie kissed him and watched Jake pull away. Then she walked into the house and saw the light on in her husband's study. Wonder if he's been in there all this time, she thought. She jerked on the door, but it was locked. Mike? She called through the door. I wanna go away, Michael's voice came to her. Christie stooped a little longer at the locked entrance listening, but then decided not to push it any further. She was more than concerned about her husband's strange behavior and went upstairs to the master bedroom. The next morning, Michael received a short message from Jake. Deal. He responded immediately with the offshore account number and a warning that he would follow up to make sure the transaction was complete. A couple hours later, Michael confirmed that the agreed amount had been received in full, after which he instantly transferred it onward, dividing it among several other accounts that he had access to exclusively. Finishing the money matters, he sent messages to Jake and Christie. Dinner will be tonight. On me. Be here at 7 p.m. sharp. He went to get the ingredients he needed for dinner for the night and returned an hour later, slamming in the kitchen. Michael loved to cook, and there was something particularly sentimental bittersweet about tonight's farewell dinner for him and his guests. Christy got home around 6 p.m. that evening and went straight into the kitchen. She had never seen or had any idea until that evening that her husband could cook, but apparently, he knew his way around a kitchen. Whatever he was cooking, it smelled delicious. "I didn't know you could cook," she said with genuine surprise. He looked at her, raising an eyebrow and resting both hands on the table before he spoke. "There's a lot you don't know about me at all," he replied, wiping his palms with a rag. "Maybe if you stayed home once in a while instead of running away to your lover, you learn something too. At least I've learned a lesson in how to stand up for myself. Now go and clean yourself up, your beau will be here soon." She made another attempt to kiss him on the cheek like yesterday, but he turned his head away and pulled back to avoid her touch. Christy staggered out of the kitchen and then ran up the stairs to the top of the stairs, tears streaming down her face. "What have I done?" she asked herself. A few minutes before 7, Jake showed up and pressed the bell at the front door. Michael opened the door and let him inside. Without further ado, Jake pulled the signed documents from the folder he'd brought with him and handed him a bunch of keys to the Bentley. "Business comes first, doesn't it?" Michael grinned. "Just like I promised," Jake replied, coughing. "Damn, my mouth was dry from all this. Can I get something to drink?" "Thank you for keeping your promise. I'll buy you and Christy great champagne soon so you can celebrate," Michael said as he tucked his keys into his pocket. He was looking forward to driving the new Bentley. Soon, Christy came downstairs looking fresh and stunning in a short black dress with a full back that left nothing to the imagination. Michael noticed that she had taken off her rings. She approached the dining table and Michael pulled back a chair for her, warning. She smiled at him as she sat down, but he didn't return her smile. Jake sat down as well, smiling wider than a Cheshire cat. "You look beautiful, my dear," he told her, kissing her hand and looking at her adoringly. "And I see that you've finally taken off your rings. That's very good." She smiled again as Michael brought 2 glasses of champagne and set them on the table in front of them. He went back to the kitchen and returned a minute later, carrying a large dish in his hands. When he removed the lid, a cloud of steam escaped and they all savored the aroma of the lasagna Michael had prepared. "It smells divine, Mike," Jake admitted, spreading the napkin on his lap. "Maybe you've missed your true calling." Michael said nothing, serving 2 servings, one for each plate. Christy picked up the utensils, but stopped, raising her gaze to him. "Aren't you going to join us?" she asked. Michael shook his head, pouring champagne into tall glasses. "No," he answered, "this dinner party is just for the 2 of you. I don't want to interfere with your enjoyment of the food and each other." Michael stepped aside and watched the lovers sip champagne for a while, toasting to each other and to a happy future together. Soon, they stopped paying attention to him and didn't even notice that he went into his office with a wry grin on his face. Lowering himself into a chair, he glanced at his watch. Any moment now, Michael thought, and indeed, it wasn't long before he heard 2 thuds and the rattle of a fallen fork. As he left the study and looked into the dining room, he saw Christy and Jake slouched in their chairs. Jake's pale face was tucked under his plate of uneaten lasagna, his left arm hanging almost to the floor. Christy's body, with her dress pulled up over her hips, slid a little off the chair, seductively exposing the ties of her stockings. Her head bowed to her chest, and the shards of a broken glass scattered on the floor beneath her arm, resting on the arm of chair. "Good," he thought, "they'll be out for at least 6 hours." Michael changed his clothes and set to work. Stripping both lovers naked, entwining their bodies and tying their arms and legs around each other. Grabbing a wheeled cart from the garage, he wheeled the 2 men outside, first wrapping their still unconscious bodies with heavy chains to which weights were attached for security. Michael put ball gags in their mouths in case they woke up before he reached his destination. It wasn't easy, but he still managed to fit them both into a large bag he had bought especially for the occasion. Using a dolly and a portable hoist, Michael transferred the sack with the lovers into the trunk of the Bentley. Then closed and locked the lid. Under the many stars in the rapidly darkening sky, he got into his car and headed out of town. When he reached his destination a few hours later, he heard fussing and muffled mooing, and then he loosened and opened the neck of the moving bag. Two stunned heads peeked out, looking around in complete panic at the darkness around them. Michael leaned over them, carrying a small pocket-stun gun. "If you promise to remain silent, I'll remove the gags and answer any questions you may have," he said. "But if you scream, I guarantee you won't like my retort," he added, demonstrating the taser in his hand. They nodded their heads almost in sync, and Michael released them from their gags. "Where are we?" Christy asked in horror. "Who are you? What the hell is going on?" Her voice was clearly panic-stricken. "Yes," Jake said. "What the hell is going on here?" "According to my GPS, we're at the exact spot where your husband killed himself," Michael told his unfaithful wife. "What? Mike, you killed himself?" Christy cried out, her eyes widening. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" "Yeah, he told me all about how you've been mean to him for the last couple of years, depriving him of sex, hornswoggling him, humiliating him, and so much more," Michael said. "Oh, I apologize. I forgot about good manners. You probably think I'm Mike. Actually, I'm his twin brother, Michael. Not only do he and I share DNA, but we just so happen to have the same name and the same middle initial." Jake and Christy stared at him in shock, like a pair of deer on the road caught in the headlights. "I warned him about you, Christy, but he lost his head in love and wouldn't listen to me. You have no idea how close I came." Michael brought his thumb and forefinger close together, to stepping in and saying something, the moment the preacher said, "If anybody has any reason why these two ought not to marry, let him say so now. But I didn't do anything then, and I still blame myself for it," he added bitterly. Were you at our wedding?" Christy asked in astonishment. "I don't remember seeing you." "I was dressed so as not to draw too much attention to myself," Michael said. "You see, Christy, although Mike and I have a lot in common in appearance, in reality, we are quite different. He was a patient and soft-hearted man who always got along with everyone around him. Unlike me, he avoided conflict. And most importantly, he loved you with all his heart and was willing to put up with almost anything just to make you happy. I, on the other hand, I saw right through you from the start. I was sure you were a conniving bitch who would cheat on him at the first opportunity that was convenient and favorable to you." "How did I know that?" "Well, you can call it a gut feeling or a sixth sense or an epiphany. Whatever, for Mike's sake, I just hoped I was wrong about you, but unfortunately for him, I was right," he added dejectedly, clasping his fingers together and staring off into the distance. "Mike never said anything about having a brother," Christy murmured in shock. "Yes. Because I urged him to," Michael said. "You see, I don't officially exist. I'd tell you why, but then I'd have to kill you. Wait a minute, though." He threw back his head and laughed. "As you can see, it's pretty dark now, so you probably don't recognize the surroundings," Michael continued after he finished laughing at his own joke. "In case you're still wondering, we're in the deepest part of Bottomless Lake, the same place where Mike ended all that crap a few days ago. You see, Christy, he couldn't take what you did to him anymore and took the easiest and quickest way out. I tried to stop him, but he was inconsolable." Tears were streaming down Christy's face. "Mike, did he kill himself?" she asked in a shaky voice. "Yeah. My God. I never wanted him dead." "Bullshit. You lying, bitch," Michael snorted contemptuously. "You threw it in his face that you didn't love him. You might as well have put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger." Michael looked at Jake. "And as for you, asshole, you've been pretending to be his best friend all these years, and you still haven't answered my question. What kind of friend is it that steals his friend's wife?" "What? You don't say anything? Keeping your head down, maybe you're finally ashamed of yourself?" Michael asked with unconcealed sarcasm. "The truth is, you asshole was never his friend. You used him to get what you wanted. You enjoyed playing on his feelings, tooting his horn, and humiliating him every chance you got. But, you promised me Christy and I would spend the rest of our lives together. Remember? Jake asked hoarsely. He raised his head and practically roared, staring angrily at his captor. You lied to me. You lied to me. Michael only laughed. You're right. I told you that you two would spend the rest of your lives together, and I didn't lie about that, Michael said. What I didn't tell you was that your lifespan would suddenly shorten dramatically. So, yes, your life together will be tumultuous, but very short. You'll even die together on the same day like in all those romance stories. Michael smirked, and it'll damn well be deserved since you two are conspiring against my brother. Please don't do this to me. To us, Christy sobbed, tears rolling down her cheeks. Michael looked at her coldly and darkly. Mike told me that he had pleaded with you in those same words before you humiliated him and made horns with your lover. He was just crushed when he told me that, Michael said, but you just laughed in his face and told him to accept the role you had in store for him. Well, bitch, now it's your turn to accept the inevitable. You're just a crazy lunatic, she shrieked and twitched inside the bag. Release us now. You're not going to get away with this, Michael shrugged. Maybe not. Maybe yes, he said, but once your goodbye message is found on your computer, it won't matter. Although, he grinned, I have to admit it's a very, very touching and poignant letter. But let's change the subject. You probably know that no one has ever found the bottom of this lake. Don't you? They don't call it the bottomless lake for nothing, and there's enough weight on that chain wrapped tightly around the two of you to make sure that your descent will be swift. Michael reached out and tugged at the jingling links of the chain. The two accomplices stared at him, paralyzed eyes round with horror. Both of them trembling. I estimate that you two will last no more than 60 seconds before you lose consciousness. You might even live a few more minutes after that. Well, it's time to say goodbye, Michael sighed with a wry smile. It's a shame we won't have a priest, rings, music, or a formal ceremony this time. Anyway, I hope you enjoy your wedding trip. Enjoy. Michael untied the bag completely, and with all his strength, turned it over until the pair of lovers, desperately twitching, struggling with each other and screaming in terror, were floundering in the water. Bon voyage, he said softly as he watched the silvery cocoon chains fade into the inky depths and the many bubbles float to the surface. Soon, the bubbles ceased to appear, and there was silence again over the dark surface of the lake, cut only by a glistening path of moonlight. Michael started the boat's engine and headed back to the cove dock, navigating by the marina lights that shone through the pre-morning fog. There, he moored the boat, turned off the engine and jumped into the Bentley parked discreetly in the dense shade of the docks. Turning the key in the ignition to the soft rumble of the revved-up engine, he made a mental note to burn the bag to destroy all traces of its previous contents. Then he pulled his cell phone from his inside pocket and sent a short text message. Done. The reply came almost instantly. Thanks, bro. Enjoy the ride.